When discussing the core essence of the art of ruling, we must look directly at an eternal law that has governed every dynasty from antiquity to the present day. That law lies not in the brutality of the sword or the scale of armies, but in the absolute asymmetry between interest and responsibility. An eminent sovereign is not one who uses violence to coerce subjects into submission. On the contrary, a great ruler is one who masters the art of statecraft to transform the colossal burden of the crown into the sacred duty of the entire populace. The ingenuity of the aristocracy lies in their establishment of a perfect game of thrones. In this game, dangers from foreign invaders, mounting debts in the treasury, or the devastating devaluation of currency are all draped in the mantle of indomitable spirit and collective responsibility. The highborn use the loftiest moral doctrines to bind the perception of the masses, causing thousands to voluntarily shoulder hardships with a pride that glows in their hearts. Yet, when the storm recedes, the skies clear, and wealth overflows, that sharing evaporates without a trace. Fertile lands, heavy gold, and the scepter of authority are once again passed only among the internal circles of the bureaucracy and the nobility. There are two ways to mobilize national strength when facing the threat of foreign invasion. The first is to use gold and silver from the royal treasury to hire mercenary armies. This method is extremely risky, as loyalty bought with material wealth is always fragile and easily collapses before a higher price offered by the enemy. The second way, far more sophisticated and effective, is to transform the war to protect the throne and the Lord's fiefdom into a war to protect the lives of all subjects. By sowing the idea of a common origin and a bound destiny, those in power succeed in socializing all dangers. When the enemy's shadow appears at the border, the court never says, "Fight to protect the private treasures of the royal family." They elevate the war into a sacred mission to protect the fatherland. Under the light of that call, from mud-covered peasants to impoverished artisans, all are honored as the indispensable cornerstones of the kingdom. They rush into the battlefield, offering their strength and falling in combat, not for personal gain, but for a moral pinnacle etched deep into their minds. Their conscience is bound by verses of loyalty and righteousness. Anyone who rejects this responsibility is immediately ostracized, not by the harsh laws of the court, but by the very rejection of their fellow countrymen. The ruler has skillfully turned the crowd into their own sentinels, using collective pride to blur the line between the safety of the throne and the survival of the poorest. Subjects believe they are defending their own homes, but in reality, they are using their bodies as shields for the magnificent castles of the lords. The art of manipulation does not stop on the smoke-filled battlefield. In times of peace, when the court's ambitions swell, when grand monuments or extravagant festivities exhaust the revenue, the dynasty inevitably sinks into debt. If the lords were to bear the consequences of their wastefulness alone, their power would immediately tremble before the wrath of creditors. Therefore, the pragmatic sovereign always knows how to use a form of financial alchemy to shift this entire burden onto the shoulders of the people. The court's debt suddenly becomes the responsibility of the entire realm. Subjects are persuaded that tightening their belts and contributing labor and resources to revive the treasury is not exploitation, but a shining testament to their steadfast loyalty. This process of sharing debt takes place under the most beautiful euphemisms, where every citizen is praised as a silent hero personally upholding an entire dynasty. Even more terrifying than the distribution of debt is the way those above siphon off wealth through the debasement of currency. Look back at the profound lesson from the ancient Roman Empire. When the treasury was empty after excessive conquests, the emperors were not so foolish as to choose direct tax increases, for that easily sowed the seeds of rebellion. Instead, they ordered a secret reduction in the amount of pure silver in the coins, mixing in base metals. The coin still bore the image of the sovereign, but its core value had been completely hollowed out. The inevitable consequence was inflation blowing up prices. With the same amount of money, the peasant's loaf of bread shrank daily, and the lifelong fruits of an artisan's labor evaporated in silence. How then did the court explain this phenomenon of impoverishment? The seasoned sovereign never admits to the act of diluting the currency. They blame the whims of fortune for bringing harsh weather, they condemn the greed of merchants, or they call it the grueling challenge of the times. At this moment, abject poverty is once again draped in the splendid robes of pride by the court. Subjects are urged to be proud of their ability to endure hardship, proud of their patient spirit in overcoming the great tribulation together. Inflation, which is essentially the most brutal form of invisible taxation, snatching food right off the tables of the poor, now becomes a grand stage for the masses to compete in patriotism. The subjects are hungry and exhausted, but their souls are filled with the illusory morality dispensed by those on the throne. Poverty is sanctified, and the rage that should have been directed at the court instead dissolves into the proud resignation of the entire people. To maintain an unjust order and operate it smoothly, the ruler's sharpest weapon is not the dungeon or the standing army. The true weapon is the monopoly on the creation of morality. Human conscience is a wilderness, and he who holds the scepter will build upon it moral fortresses to protect his own interests. When an impoverished crowd believes that yielding most of their produce to the Lord's granary is a chivalrous act, they have completely abdicated their capacity to resist. Cunning lords have skillfully constructed an unbreakable logical architecture. In this psychology, all the glory of the kingdom is a collective spiritual asset, but all actual losses must be fiercely distributed among the lowest classes. The sophistication of this invisible yoke lies in the fact that it makes subjects mistakenly believe they are truly co-owners of the kingdom. They revel in the illusion of equality when standing in the same trench, sharing a crust of dry bread in times of depletion. They honor one another in distress without realizing that the only equality they have been granted is the equality in bearing misfortune. The art of statecraft lies in the ability to maintain this illusion to a point of perfection, making the crowd not only enter into tribulation voluntarily, but also rejoice in that austerity. When contemplating this contradictory mechanism, one cannot overlook the ruler's talent in manipulating both adversity and prosperity. In the art of governance, fortune is a blind force, often bringing terrifying shocks like invasions or empty treasuries. A mediocre ruler will be swept away by this whirlwind, but lords possessing exceptional statesmanship know how to exploit these very storms to consolidate their throne. They turn the nation's disaster into a great crucible. In that crucible, the selfishness and desire for private property of the masses are melted down, forced to be cast into a single metal block called universal duty. The ultimate irony of this crucible is that it only operates in one direction. It melts the private ownership of the poor to serve the common good, but creates a solid shield to protect the absolute private property of the officials. While the crowd believes they are contributing firewood to keep the entire kingdom warm, they are unaware that the flame is being funneled directly to heat the velvet-carpeted rooms of the nobility. The sovereign does not deceive the subjects through violence. They deceive through the art of conceptual exchange. The court dispenses a spiritual currency called honor and receives in return actual labor and material wealth. This exchange always takes place under the brilliant light of self-esteem, ensuring that the exploited not only bear no grudge, but are also ready to punish anyone in their own ranks who dares to voice doubt. This is the pinnacle of ruling, an art that transforms exploitation into a secular religion, where those above are the priests dispensing faith, and the subjects are the devout believers voluntarily exhausting themselves to offer sacrifices for the protection of the sacred temple. However, the turning point of this grand drama only reveals the whole truth when the storm has completely subsided. When the kingdom repels the invaders, when the massive debts are leveled by the sweat and tears of 10,000 people, and when flourishing trade brings in endless wealth, the mask of sharing immediately falls. The previously proud common destiny is coldly fragmented. The fertile fields, the bustling ports flowing with gold, all are immediately gathered and meticulously divided into the private storehouses of the officials and the nobility. The crowd that once sacrificed themselves at the border now returns to their dilapidated thatched roofs and empty hands. Their reward consists of hollow praises during festivals, invisible titles carved into cold stone slabs. Meanwhile, all tangible assets, from land to supreme authority, are permanently locked within the hands of the princely class. Power at this point no longer belongs to the whole people. It becomes a block of priceless privilege, passed from generation to generation within the royal circle, creating an inviolable barrier that no commoner can ever breach. In contrast to the scene of the entire populace bending their backs to carry debt or endure the devaluation of assets, within the magnificent palaces, the officials never share a single gold coin with the destitute. The concept of the whole people disappears entirely from the court's dictionary when the time comes to divide the spoils and bounties. This is the truest and rawest principle of power. The ruler never craves pure fairness. The only thing they crave is to maintain a one-way order of devotion. Using the pinnacle of morality to bind the resistance of the subjects is essentially just a stepping stone. The ultimate goal is always the absolute concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a privileged minority. A perfect architecture of power is always molded from the most cunning substitution of concepts in human history. Dangers, debts, and bankruptcy are always welcomed with the open arms of an invisible collective unity stretching across the realm. Meanwhile, wealth, land, and the power to decide destiny withdraw discreetly behind golden doors, where there are only the whispers of a group monopolizing privilege. When the song of pride in sacrifice is sung most heroically, echoing across the sweat-drenched squares, will the peasant in worn-out clothes have a quiet moment to realize what they truly hold, other than the shimmering illusions of a preordained morality?